Go to skeptic.com/magazine to order your subscription, or even any of the back issues all the way back to 1993 actually 92, what am I saying, when we first began. So cool. All right. My guest today is Olga Kazan. Am I pronouncing that right? Kazan?
I usually say Hazan.
Hazan. Oh, okay. The K is soft.
Yes.
Anyway, she's a staff writer for The Atlantic and author of Weird, The Power of Being an Outsider in an Insider World. Okay, we'll get to that maybe later. She's written for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and other publications. She's a 2-time recipient of journalism fellowships from the International Reporting Project and winner of the 2017 National Headliner Award for Magazine Online Writing. She lives with her husband and son in Northern Virginia. And here's the new book, Me, But Better. She's better now. The Science and Promise of Personality Change. I really wanted to do this because I think this is a fascinating subject that I haven't really addressed too much on this show. So let's get into it. Olga, how's it going? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, new book. So very exciting. So give us a little bit of background. What's your story? How did you become an outsider in the first place?
Yeah. So for my first book, I talked a little bit about my background, which is that I'm a Russian immigrant who grew up in West Texas, which was a pretty unusual experience. But actually for me, but better, I kind of dove into something else that I've always wrestled with, which is a high level of anxiety and what the personality scientists call neuroticism, which is a personality trait that's correlated with depression and anxiety. I noticed that my reactions to things were often sort of out of proportion or kind of not helping me, not moving me forward. And so I started to experiment with ways to actually change my personality based on science that, actual psychologists have done that show that people can actually change their personality traits by behaving differently over time. So that's the project that I did for my second book.
And you're a science writer. How did you get into that?
Yeah. So I came to The Atlantic in 2013 and I moved over to the science desk in 2014 and written about a lot of different things, kind of cultural issues, psychology, just kind of COVID and all that stuff, medicine and healthcare.
And this was originally a cover story of The Atlantic or a major feature?
Yeah, this was a cover story that I kind of experimented with some of these strategies and kind of dipped my toe into the world of personality change and kind of blew it out into a whole book. And I think the story came out in 2022 or something like that. Or maybe 2021. And so this book is coming out in March and is sort of a follow-up to that.
Yeah, you, just looking through your acknowledgments here, I had Catherine Page Harden on the show, and she revealed something interesting. We were talking about behavior genetics and to what extent personality can be not determined by genetics, but certainly highly influenced. And she actually started talking about genetic proxies for divorce. And then she talked about her own relationship problems and how difficult she is. And I think she was talking there about neuroticism, right? The emotional regulation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, so she and I talked a lot about kind of this idea with personality change is that, a lot of people think you can't change your personality because your personality is genetic in part, and it is kind of supposedly predetermined by your parents in that case. So you're going to be exactly like one or the other of your parents. But she kind of explained that that's not really the case. And that in reality, your personality is like getting, and the genes that determine your personality is more like getting a bunch of ingredients in a pantry. So your parents give you a bunch of different ingredients, but how they actually combine and how the kind of person you become depends on other factors than just, flour, salt, sugar, whatever else is in there. It depends on, how hot your oven is, whether you whip the eggs or whether you fry them. All those things could become so many different dishes. And that's sort of how our genes work too, is that there's a lot of stochasticity from when you actually inherit your genes and to the kind of person you become. And in that process, in that kind of baking or whatever whipping process is personality change.
Yeah, we'll get into all that in detail in a minute because you cover that a lot in the book, and it's a really well written book. Let me say, I really enjoy science writers and journalists' books. Actually, I hate to say this, more than scientists and academics, because they can't write very well. Or I don't know if it's that they can't, it's just that they're trained to write in this very kind of methodical, laying pipe type of way, the method section and the conclusion and all that stuff. And you're a storyteller. I mean, there's an art to weaving the science into a story that's compelling to read.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. I mean, it definitely, like, our training is pretty much straight storytelling and how to make things, understandable for the average reader. And academics obviously have very different type of training, which is to be as precise as possible and to contribute to scientific knowledge. So journalists definitely don't contribute to scientific knowledge usually. And so I'm really grateful to academics for providing a lot of the studies and the interviews that help make some of this stuff digestible. But I definitely, it's a slightly different kind of a thing that we're doing.
I feel like I know you. It's sort of unfair. You don't really know me, but I know you because there's so much of your personal life in here. So just give us a little bit. Were you just difficult to live with or be around or be in relationships or have friends? Or how did you know that you were an outsider in that sense, personality wise?
So it wasn't so much that I didn't have friends or that people were constantly telling me that I was difficult. It was more just that things would happen and I would react in ways that I realized were disproportionate to what had happened. So the book kind of opens with this day that I had where, honestly, if I even just describe it, it doesn't sound that bad. I got a really bad haircut and then immediately had to have professional photos taken of me that looked bad. And then I got stuck in traffic. I had to go grocery shopping, like to get food for a family member. On the way back from grocery shopping, my cart got stuck. It would not, like, it got stuck too far from my car. So there was like no way to get the groceries to the car. So it was like dragging a heavy grocery cart across like a hot parking lot. Again, these are all things that like you
First
might
world problems.
yeah, like you might recount to your partner later as like, what a day. I really had so much frustration that day. I got home, I was crying. I was like, completely just melting down. I felt like I had to have a glass of wine right away. Like it was just so, and I noticed this happening, a fair amount that things would happen, they would kind of build up and I would have like this pressure building up inside me. And a lot of that did have to do with the fact that I had a very high level of neuroticism. When I took these scientifically backed personality tests, they showed that I scored higher than most other people on the personality trait of neuroticism. So I started kind of working on how to bring that down, but not just neuroticism, but also other elements of my personality that I felt like weren't serving me that well.
Right. Okay. What is personality and what is a personality trait?
Yeah, opinions on this differ. It might not surprise you to hear that. Personality, the kind of best definition that I got is that it's sort of habits and behaviors that serve some purpose in your life. So looking at extroversion, that's a really easy personality trait to wrap your head around. Extroversion is sort of people's tendency to be friendly and cheerful and outgoing, and to want to do stuff. Extroverts really like to be on the move. They don't like to just kind of relax and be bored. And extroversion helps you in all sorts of ways in life. It helps you make friends. It helps you find job opportunities. It helps you actually, have a lot of interesting experiences. These personality traits, instead of just sort of describing who you are, they can almost be like tools to help you accomplish your goals. And so that's why I sort of started looking at them as like, are my personality traits helping me accomplish my goals, or are they kind of undermining me?
Right. So I guess underlying it is the idea that there's certain characteristics that define you, and we're using adjectives to describe them. If they weren't fairly consistent over time, then you would just be constantly changing. But people are not like that. But yet they're not like categories in which you're always extroverted or, never introverted. Sometimes you're introverted. So they're context dependent. I guess the problem is it's a little bit like Wittgenstein's problem with language and concepts. What is a game? Well, you define it, and then you can always find exceptions, right? So what is an extrovert? Well, he's mostly extroverted except for what he's not. Well, okay, but what does that mean, right? And, are you extroverted in your teens, but in your 20s you're not? I mean, if it's just willy-nilly and there's no traits, then personality is meaningless. And yet we know personality is real, but it can't be that fixed because people do change. So I guess the problem is almost like the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, defining what is depression, what is schizophrenia, what is psychosis. And they have a list of like 27 characteristics, and if you take 15 of the 27 or whatever, you lean toward that category. So is personality something like that? If you kind of cluster around this trait here, that we can say you're extroverted?
Yeah, good question. So the psychologists that I talk to really avoid any kind of personality metrics that put people in categories. So that includes like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, where people might have taken this in like career, class in high school, where it tells you like INTJ or whatever. So usually things are not, personality traits for most people, you're not going to be in a kind of a hard and fast category like that. It's more of a spectrum, and you can fall along that spectrum. So, we all know people who are super duper introverted, really hate socializing, have a super short social battery. If they go and give a talk somewhere, they have to like really amp themselves up for it, and then they have to have a long come down period afterward. Then we all know people who are super extroverted, work in sales and marketing, love talking to people, love glad handing, so those are maybe like the two ends of the spectrum. Most of us fall somewhere between that, right? And so like when you hear someone say, I'm an introvert sometimes and an extrovert sometimes, it's more likely just that they're somewhere in the middle there, and they're kind of remembering times that they behave like an extrovert and remembering other times that they behave like an introvert. So that's one thing, is that they're not really like a hard type as we often think of them, or as we even might describe ourselves. And they are actually, personality traits are fairly consistent over time. Like most people don't. Most people do change over the course of their lives. They do become different. They slide along those spectrums a little bit. Kind of depending on various things that happen to them, things that they personally might try to do, experiences that they have, their peers. They do eventually, go from maybe, the 20th percentile on extroversion to the, 50th, 60th. But, for the most part, they are pretty stable like that. Not everyone kind of goes up that much. And that would be like a pretty big increase. The kind of line that I always got from a lot of the researchers that I talked to is that personality traits are fairly stable, but they also can change.
Yeah. One of my favorite books, psychologist Richard Wiseman, and he wrote a book on luck. And so first of all, I want to know if are self-reported lucky people who call themselves lucky actually luckier? Do they actually win the lottery more? Which was his test, and the answer is no. But then he gave them a battery of the big five, and he found out that self-report lucky people are high in extraversion and high in openness to experience. So they go to more parties, they talk to more people, and then more things happen, like I got that job or I met this person. And then in hindsight, they go back, man, was I ever lucky? I went to that party, whatever.
Right. And so part of extroversion is also being cheerful. And so they might just think of themselves as lucky because they're like kind of happy. Like they just sort of, they kind of count their blessings and they see themselves as lucky, even if like not that many good things are happening to them. And I think that neuroticism, actually, one of the elements of it is that you tend to see that a lot of bad things happen to you, even if bad things actually don't.
Yeah, well, so there's an interpretation of what happened, I guess, could be colored. And so if you're cheerful, maybe you smile more. And if you're in a social environment and you smile and then somebody smiles back, you get that. sets up an autocatalytic positive feedback loop. And then that leads to more things and so on. But what if I'm not that way? What if I'm kind of on the introverted side, but I read this study and I think, okay, I'm really got to go to this party. I really don't want to. And then I walk in the room and, oh, there's all these people. I really don't want to talk to these strangers, but I'm going to do it anyway. Apparently this is doable.
That is unfortunately what you got to do if you want to be more extroverted. Yeah. So the kind of strategies for changing your personality are slightly different for every trait. So some of them are more like inner work rather than kind of just literal activities that you do. But the ones for extroversion are all mostly focused on other people and talking to other people. And you don't really have to like love doing it while you do it. Like you can kind of go out and have like a semi-okay time and talk to a few people and then like, quickly kind of go home, after the appetizer course or whatever. And that's okay. That actually still increases extroversion because like you actually did it. And one of the researchers that I talked to, I was sort of she researches weak ties, which is sort of people who you talk to, but they don't become like your lifelong friends. So this is like your mailman, your barista, people who just are sort of in your world, but and you exchange some words, but you're not like BFFs with them. And I was sort of, what I took to her was that like, she says that talking to these folks is really important. Like these weak ties are a big part of what makes us feel good about ourselves, woven into the community and kind of like healthy as people. And my counterpoint to that was that often when I make small talk with people, it is not very rewarding to me personally. Like it doesn't feel like the conversation had a big payoff or it's just like a little bit awkward or like I was doing a lot of small conversations at the time through these meetup groups that I was going on. And I was kind of like not too impressed with the level of conversation quality I was having. Which, I mean, maybe I was also part of the problem, right? Like I was like sort of expecting these people to like wow me and like they were also like on this random hike or whatever. But what this woman said to me was like, even if you saw a movie and it wasn't that great, it was like kind of boring or like didn't really end the way you wanted it to, you wouldn't be like, I'm never going to see a movie again, right? You would watch other movies. And similarly, like a conversation or a I guess like experience of extroversion that doesn't go quite how you want it or isn't like perfect doesn't mean you're not an extrovert. It just means that some experiences are suboptimal.
Right. Okay. Could you give us just a kind of a brief history of personality research going back to, Freud and Jung and all those and how we ended up at the Big Five, which seems to be, I guess, is it still the consensus? That's the most reliable, valid test we have of personality?
The Big Five is the consensus as sort of like what people rely on. It has all these flaws, which I won't get into. People like debate about whether certain traits make sense or not, but Big Five is like what everyone uses because that's the best we got, basically. And it's kind of interesting. So psychology does not have a long history. It's only been around since like the 1920s-ish. Sort of Freud was sort of the, everyone knows him. He was sort of the granddaddy of psychology, of like what we think of as modern psychology. And he sort of believed that people have these impulses. They have these like inner conflicts from their childhood. They were potty trained too early or too late or something, and now like they have these like sexual fantasies that are really strange. He obviously pioneered talk therapy. So kind of the where personality psychology really like deviated away from that was with this guy named Gordon Allport, who kind of believed that rather than having these like hidden inner demons that like basically rule us, we have traits. We have like things that we like and dislike and ways to describe ourselves. He went through the dictionary and found words that describe the way people are. And some of them were a little bit like strange. Like I think two of them were like airy and zestful, which like I don't think a lot of people call themselves zestful, but so he writes them down and he's like, okay, these are all the traits. And then kind of a succession of researchers took that list and narrowed them down and narrowed them down and narrowed them down. And then finally they ended up with the big 5 traits because all the other ones were essentially just synonyms of those 5.
Right. So we have ocean, OCEAN, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, introversion, agreeableness, and I guess disagreeableness, and neuroticism. Right. So zestfulness would be under one of those categories, or, slothfulness,
Yeah,
I guess
exactly,
would be the other.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So each of these has a kind of a subcategory. Okay. Now, one of the things I find interesting with the debates in psychology is to what extent people actually have access to their own inner states, right? Because these are all self-report data. So, for example, I just retook the Big 5 last night just to see how I did. And so they go something like this, just to give listeners an idea. On a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being strongly disagree, 2 disagree, neither agree nor disagree in the middle, agree and strongly agree is a 5. So then you go, oh, I am someone who is outgoing, sociable, 1 to 5, compassionate, has a soft heart, tends to be disorganized, is relaxed, handles stress well, has few artistic interests, has an assertive personality, is respectful, treats others with respect, tends to be lazy, and so on and so forth. And, and there's, I don't know, like 70 of these or something, 65 I think we had on this test. When I was retaking those last night, I was thinking, well, maybe it kind of depends on the context. I'm outgoing and sociable. Yeah, I guess most of the time, but, maybe 20% of the time I'm not. I gave myself, I think, a 4 on that. But how do I know what I really am like? Maybe you need to have your spouse or your partner take the test for you. I see my spouse as someone who is sociable, outgoing, and then correlate those or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to speak a little bit out of pocket here because I did research this a while ago, but it's actually not in the book. But I believe that people's impressions of their own personality are pretty correct, especially if you're kind of taking a test like this that's not, you just shared it with everyone, but you didn't have to. It could have just been, for you. You had no pressure to kind of self-enhance your scores. So it generally is thought that people do have an accurate impression, and that close others, so like your spouse or your brother or your best friend, would also have a pretty accurate view of that personality. So yes, it's true that like there are some people, like psychopaths, for example, might say that they're like this really nice, great guy, and really they're a psychopath. But for like the modal person, they're pretty accurate.
The modal person, I love that.
Yeah.
So the idea the psychopath knows what he's supposed to say,
Yes.
even though he knows what his own internal state is not actually like that.
Yeah, but psychopathy is pretty rare.
Yeah. 1 to 3%, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So interesting. Back in the day, in the 90s, I did a couple of interesting pieces of research on this, in which well, first of all, I wrote a biography of Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of natural selection. I sent you a few things on this. What kind of a personality was he, and how did he differ from Darwin? Right. So I had some Darwin and Wallace scholars and historians of science take the Big 5 for that person. Like, I see Charles Darwin as someone who is outgoing, sociable, compassionate, soft heart, and so on and so forth. And then I had, I don't know, I think 6 or 7 historians of science. And then I ran a inter-rater reliability correlation between the raters. I got all this idea from Frank Sulloway, the personality psychologist, who did this, correlating it with birth order, which is interesting. Like, firstborns tend to be high in conscientiousness, for example. Laterborns tend to be higher in openness to experience. Anyway, and so, yeah, and they were very consistent. I did this with Carl Sagan's friends and his wife, his widow, after he died. I see Carl Sagan as someone who is, and then they took the battery of tests. And they were pretty consistent. I mean, reliable across the raters. So I think you're right. I think that it is fairly accurate of somebody.
Yeah. There's also, there's been a like fair number of people who have tried to assess Trump's personality.
Right.
And they'll kind of take the personality test like as though they're Trump or like assessing Trump. And even those now they do vary based on um, the politics of the person assessing him. So like people who oppose Trump think he's not very conscientious, for example. But on some stuff they actually do agree. Like I think everyone agrees that Trump is very extroverted, even if you really don't like him much.
Certainly, I would say he's probably high in conscientiousness because he's very fastidious and right. He's kind of a germaphobe, so he's always concerned about the details of things like that. Although I guess now that I say that, other things he's kind of whimsically just gets up and starts talking or just makes a decision at the last minute. I don't know what that would be under. That would probably be low in conscientiousness.
Yeah. A lot of people think he's low in conscientiousness because of that tendency that he just kind of spouts off about whatever.
And he would be high in disagreeableness or low in agreeableness, right?
Well, yeah. And that depends on like whether you like him or not. Like the people who voted for
Right.
Trump are like, he's very agreeable. He loves us. Like, you know what I mean? And the people who don't like him are,
Or
don't think that.
To reverse that, he would be highly agreeable with people that kiss his ring and agree with him. In that case, I like that guy.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that old Goldwater rule about, psychologists and psychiatrists not diagnosing presidents, right? Or presidential candidates. Although that was more back in the day when we didn't have such a good battery of tests, right? Okay, so in psychometrics, you have reliability and validity. So reliability is consistency over time. So we've talked about that. The big five are fairly consistent over the lifespan of somebody, reasonably consistent. And then the validity question is it actually measuring what it says it's measuring? So address that. I guess if we talk about openness to, we're using adjectives, openness to conscientiousness. Is that what it's really measuring? So there you have to have a lot of different subsections of that, different adjectives or different ways of coming at it. And then the researchers then correlate those answers to those questions, and then they put them in that category. And because there's so many different ones, it's fairly valid.
So the reason why the Big Five is used is because it has high reliability and validity, and that was like testing and analysis done before I came onto the scene and started writing about it. That was kind of in the 90s when they were coming up with the Big Five. I will say the one that like seems the most fuzzy or wishy-washy is openness to experience, which is this trait that is sort of like imaginativeness, and like creativity and like loving art and liberalism, and but it kind of is like an umbrella for a bunch of stuff that doesn't really make sense as a trait to some people. Like it's kind of like, what even is this? So the big thing that it correlates with is political liberalism. But it's sort of like, if you read the description, it's sort of like a liberalism from more like the 90s or like Obama era, rather than like, like what even is political liberalism now? Like it's like conservatism is now like populism. So that one is like a little bit fuzzier. Even to me, I'm sort of like, I don't know if this is like, this might be changing based on the like mores of the time, sort of. And some people have suggested that there should be like an honesty trait, or humility. And some people think humility is part of agreeableness. So there are sort of like debates within psychology about what should go with which trait and what are they really measuring.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that has changed so much. What do we mean by a liberal? When I think of liberals, I think of of Obama or I don't know, just Bill Clinton, something like that. Johnson, Kennedy, as presidents, and progressives today, I think, is not the same. In the same way you mentioned, populists or whatever Trump is different than, say, a John McCain kind of conservative. Maybe we have four different categories. You have sort of the far right, and then the populist right, and then the old school Republicans, the old GOP, the never Trumpers, as they're now called. And then on the left, you have the kind of just left of center, maybe Biden, Clinton, and so on. Then you have the AOCs of the far left, the Bernies, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other kind of strange thing about that trait, beyond like the political kind of paradox that it brings up, is that it correlates with some kinds of intelligence, but not others. So
Mm,
it correlates with verbal intelligence, but not mathematical intelligence,
mm.
which kind of is like, why would it just be with one of those? Um, and yeah, it just is like it's a strange trait, and the only thing that really seems to work to like definitely increase it is psychedelics. Which, like, why would psychedelics work on this personality trait, and why would that be benefit? Nobody really understands that either. It's basically just kind of like the most mysterious one.
You mean like the microdosing that people are doing now?
Actually macro dosing, yeah.
Oh,
So all the
macro.
the studies that show increases, like long lasting increases in openness to experience, is
Yeah,
from people taking like large doses of psychedelics.
yeah. Let's see. Here's where I scored last night when I took it. Right in the middle on openness to experience, very high in conscientiousness, pretty high, like 91st. Oh, here, I'll just read the numbers here. 52nd percentile in open-mindedness, 99th percentile conscientiousness, 98th percentile in extraversion, 74th percentile in agreeableness, and 46th percentile in, well, negative emotional. I guess they're not using the word neuroticism anymore, right? Because it's a little bit of a pejorative.
There's some tests do, and some it is pejorative. So the like positive side of neuroticism is emotional stability. So it's
Mm.
someone who is not neurotic is emotionally stable. So some tests will say emotional stability instead of neuroticism, because all the other ones are like good and neuroticism is bad. So to make it consistent, they'll use emotional stability. But there's already an E in ocean, so they and
That's
they need an
funny.
N. So it depends on kind of what you're looking at.
Yeah. Oh, this is the term Frank and I came. Yeah, negative emotionality rather than neuroticism. Yeah, who was
Yeah.
that guy at Google that got fired for saying that, explaining that the reason there aren't as many women programmers is because women score higher on neuroticism and they're neurotic. And then he got in big trouble for calling women neurotic. It's like, no, I mean it on the big five.
I don't remember that guy specifically, but women do score higher on neuroticism.
Yeah. So why is that?
Um, Several possible reasons. One is that more bad things might happen to women, like sexual assaults and other kind of unfortunate things that then cause us to be more neurotic, and anxious and depressed. Um, Another is like hormonal fluctuations throughout the month, just like those hormones do act on our brains and can make us feel um, like different ways. And one of those could be more neurotic. Now, men also have hormonal fluctuations, and those hormones also do things to their brains. So it's not like only women have this issue. It's just that we don't talk as much about men's hormones. Um, Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's other. It could be socialization. So, if it's especially, I mean, not so much in today's generation, but previous generations. When I was a little girl, if I wanted to go climb a tree, my parents would be like, be careful, you'll hurt yourself. Be careful, you'll fall." And so there's like this thinking that parents are kind of more discouraging of girls taking risks, or doing things that aren't careful. But with boys, it's like they're more kind of lax about it, or they even encourage kind of like risk taking behavior for boys. And so girls kind of develop anxiety about taking risks and being not careful, while boys are kind of more bold, or kind of socialized to be more bold. That may be changing now. So it'd be interesting to see if kind of neuroticism scores among women go down.
Yeah, well, you would predict that at least somewhat because some of it's genetic. But instead of looking at it in a negative light, I think, an evolutionary model that women are more risk averse for very good reasons, which you just said. That is, there's more dangers to women. You're smaller, you're weaker. You can get pregnant, you can get STDs more, and you can be, assaulted by much bigger men. You should be risk averse. And now that you're a parent, that's, you're really hyper sensitive to risks to your child and so on. That's actually a good thing. The world is a dangerous place. There are bad people, right?
Yeah, and and I read this one book. This didn't make it into the book, but I did read some research that suggests that women might actually have the correct amount of anxiety and
Right,
men are not
right,
anxious enough. And so like
right.
though we see neuroticism as like a bad thing, it could also be that women are like they're right. Like the world is dangerous and women are like accurately aware of that and men should maybe be more
Yes.
aware.
Have, have you seen those videos of like the Darwin Award videos? It's always guys like hold my beer while I jump off the roof and see if I can make it to the pool.
Yeah, that's what happens with low neuroticism. They're not worried. They're not worried.
Yeah, yeah, but that's stupid, right? Maybe this is in part why women live longer than men.
It is part of it, yeah.
Yeah, right. For good reasons. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of research on this in the evolutionary. So I've done several podcasts on this about risk averse and male female sexual preference differences, and how much more carefree and high risk taking men are about sex than women for all these good reasons we just covered. So, I think that kind of makes sense. Now, on the political thing, I do remember John Jost's famous article, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago now, in which he was examining kind of the conservative personality. And of course, conservatives were not happy to read this because it made it sound like, what's wrong with conservatives? Like they have cancer. They have this conservative bad genes or bad personality types. But some of it was like, how open are you to immigrants? And that conservative personalities and temperament tend to be a little more risk averse when it comes to like germaphobes. If you score high in being more of a germaphobe, then you're more likely to be skeptical and worried about immigrants for the, kind of the same. They're bringing bad things into our country as if the country is like a body, something like that. And he had a bunch of proxies for these things, like how many books on travel do you have in your home? And liberals have more books on travel, and they actually do travel more. Right? They go to foreign countries. They look forward to going to a country where they don't speak the language, and they're okay with that. And other people are just, I don't know, I don't want to go to a place where they don't speak English, or or I don't like this weird food, right? And so the theory behind that is that we don't pick our political parties or orientations based on any principles, gun control or abortion or immigration, whatever. It's how do I feel personality-wise with these people versus those people, with this kind of environment versus that kind of environment? And if you have those characteristics in which, you are more risk-averse, let's say, or you're less open to experience and travel, and it's just more comfortable to be around people that think like you think. It just feels better, right? And so then we orient toward the political party that has those people with those characteristics and principles that make me feel good.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the overlap between openness to experience and liberalism is sort of that kind of diversity, kind of travel, new experiences connection. Is like, the people that have the signs that say like in this house we believe like
Yes.
no human is illegal or whatever. Like
Yes.
that is like openness to it's sort of like, yeah, whatever, like let them come, like yeah, like let everyone come over. It's okay if like a million different languages are spoken all around me. Like it's okay, so the people who are like excited by that, Trader Joe's shoppers, like let's get the like interesting wontons for dinner, let's not have mac and cheese again. Like those people are open to experiences, and that is just, it is strongly correlated with liberalism. So I mean, where I don't necessarily see a correlation is like among some liberals, especially recently, I feel like there's been this trend toward like not saying certain things, or like you can't say that, or like you can't
Mhm.
point that out, or like you have to use this word instead of that word. And that's like a little bit less of the like anything goes kind of sensibility that people who are high on openness to experience have. So that's where I'm kind of not sure whether that might be changing, that association between those two.
I think you're right. I think that has changed in part because we've made so much moral progress that the big issues have been largely dealt with: civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and so on. And so we're kind of fine-tuning our sensitivities, our moral sense of justice and right and wrong to ever smaller things like microaggressions. Oh, you use that adjective instead of this adjective to describe this person of color or whatever it is. To the point where you get these lists that universities hand out to students and faculty. These are the words you can use. These are the words you shouldn't use because they're offensive to people. To a 1960s liberal, this would be, like against free speech. Like, come on. Right. So it has changed.
Yeah. And yeah. So I don't know, like where, maybe they might consider themselves open to experiences except for on this like narrow list of like verbiage that they prefer or whatever. But I haven't seen any research on that. Like I haven't, I was like curious about that. And then for a while I was curious about whether people who are Trump supporters are actually open to experiences, because he is kind of an unconventional guy. Like he is not John McCain. Like he has had several marriages and he has this unusual background of being on TV. And he's just like not someone you would pick if you were like this like traditionalist person that we normally think of as being open to experiences. Or I'm sorry, that of low openness to experiences. So yeah, that's another one where I'm sort of like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think the Never Trumpers, these were mostly old school GOP guys, older generation. And, they're sticking to their tried and true principles of conservatism that have worked for centuries, right? That kind of Edmund Burkean conservatism, that there's a reason why we don't tear the whole system down and start over like the French Revolution guys did. And that led to a bloodbath. We got to do it legally, constitutionally, like the American Revolution. So Burke famously supported the American Revolution, was against the French Revolution, and so let's make the case for conservatives in that case. The world is a dangerous place, as I mentioned, and maybe it's not completely unreasonable for conservatives to be worried about immigrants and dangerous people in other countries and non-Western cultures that want to influence our Western cultures, because we have these traditional faith and family and religion and the rule of law and the Constitution. These things are tried and true. And they're there for good reasons. And maybe, like you mentioned, maybe women have the right amount of anxiety and tension and so forth, because that's the way the world really is. It reminds me of one of my favorite movie clips is from A Few Good Men, when Jack Nicholson schools Tom Cruise on the way the world really is. You can't handle the truth. What's the truth? We live in a world with walls, and on those walls are men with guns. And you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. When you're at parties enjoying your freedom, I'm on the wall protecting you. That's how conservatives think, but really kind of for good reason, right?
Yeah, and in the book, like, so especially the openness chapter, and I know we've been talking about it for a while, so feel free to
it's okay.
move to a different trait. But I kind of was like, oh, like, is it starting to sound like being super open is just like amazing and great, and like everyone should try to be as as open to experiences as possible. But actually, like, there's sometimes you can be too open. Like the high openness has a correlation with like sort of strange like beliefs, like pseudoscientific beliefs, like that you might be psychic or that you're telepathic, for example. Yeah, and then, people who are raised by parents who were sort of like no rules, like hippies, anything goes, they often had like kind of traumatic childhoods, because it's scary to not have someone who is a little bit of a fuddy-duddy in your life who is like kind of telling you what the rules actually are, and instead of sort of like encouraging you to do whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right, conscientiousness. We haven't touched that one too much. So these are people that are very organized, goal setting. They have their marching orders. They got their ducks all lined up, and they're going to do it day by day.
Yes, exactly. And I'm very conscientious. This was a hard one for me to write because I started out very conscientious and I'm still very conscientious.
You are?
Yes.
Like what? Like, what do you do?
I just am I just don't miss deadlines. I have a to-do list. I don't know. I'm very organized. Like if I have a few spare minutes right before this podcast, I like meal prepped. I just am like kind of always on point.
Meal prepped? What does that mean? You mean for dinner tonight?
Yeah.
That's funny.
I got something started for dinner.
That's really funny. Okay. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, some of that's good, but So, like the way you open the book, this happened and this happened. You're getting more and more irritated. I find this happens to me when I get up in the morning. I go, okay, these are the 6 things I'm going to do today, and then there's one interruption. It's like, okay, I can deal with that. And the second, and a third, and a fourth, and all of a sudden it's like 11 in the morning, and I haven't done anything. And that's when I find myself like, really, God damn it, what is going on here? It's like the world's conspiring to prevent me from making my goals for today. So that would be a negative aspect of being too conscientious.
Yeah. And so all of these traits, like when you take them too far, you kind of don't want to be that person, right? Like kind of like what I was saying for openness to experience, where like it's kind of not great to be like on the extreme end. Conscientiousness, it can start to look a lot like obsessive compulsive disorder. If you kind of have to have things a certain way and any deviation from that is going to like blow up your whole schedule and your whole world, then, that's not really a great thing either. Like you want to be someone who's kind of a go-getter, but also have the flexibility that when life happens, you can adjust your plans. And so people who are really, really conscientious can be kind of rigid and not able to deal with that.
Right. I mean, so there are so many interruptions and randomness. Life is stochastic. So in a way, that would be too high a trait. You don't want to score too high in that trait. Now, let's talk about these different personalities in terms of like success in life or how lives turn out. I guess it sort of depends on what the metric is, right? I mean, it's like, well, I want to make a lot of money and I want to be a CEO or whatever, and climb the corporate ladder. That would be one set of characteristics. I want to be an entrepreneur and start, the next Google or what. That would be a different set of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, the one that everyone seems to want or, like, seems to result in a lot of good things is conscientiousness. So, conscientious people are healthier, they live longer, they do tend to achieve more just because they're always doing stuff. So they do ultimately, like, make more money and stuff like that just because they're someone who's always productive is ultimately going to do more. But the other ones are a little bit like funny. Like, so I think there's like this stereotype that smart people are kind of angsty and moody, but neuroticism doesn't actually correlate with intelligence or anything like that. It actually is a negative. It's not really a good thing to be really neurotic. It doesn't like help you become this like moody genius. And then openness to experience, sorry to return to that one, but having high levels of that doesn't really make you make a lot of money. It's sort of just makes you more like in touch with who you really are, if that's like something that's important to you. But it doesn't like, help you make like $10,000 more a year or whatever. And same with agreeableness. Agreeable people have a lot of friends. They get along with everyone. They're very empathetic. But in part because of that, they have really strong, social connections and social networks, but they don't necessarily make a lot more money than other people because they don't focus on that as much. They focus on helping people and like being nice. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, again, I guess it depends on what your goals are in life. I mean, having money is good for many things, but it's just a proxy for something else. It gives you more freedom or opportunities or something like that. That's not going to, help you have better relationships, say. But we can't help but use individual examples like Elon Musk. He's the topic of choice, this autistic genius or whatever. He's on the spectrum, but I don't know. We can generalize from, one or two people. Steve Jobs, what was his like, his life like? Well, I use this as an example of the biography bias, right? No one writes biographies of people that drop out of college and move back to their parents' home, do a startup company with their buddy and go out of business. Right. So what's the secret sauce? I don't know. Everybody read Walter Isaacson's biography, like, okay, so you got to go to this liberal arts college and drop out. And you got to be an asshole and maybe a vegetarian or a vegan or whatever he was, and treat your employees really bad. It's like, no, that can't be the formula.
Yeah, I mean, and so much of it for that stuff, there aren't that many Steve Jobses out there, and a lot of it is like correlation and not causation. Like there's some evidence that CEOs tend to be disagreeable. So that's like the Steve Jobs stereotype that he was not very agreeable to be around. But we don't know if like that it just so happens that that's what they're like, or whether the disagreeableness actually helped them to get ahead. So I would caution people before trying to like follow in the personality footsteps of their like favorite CEO or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so changing these personality traits. This reminds me of Aristotle's virtue ethics theory that just act virtuous and you will become virtuous. Well, this implies that you can actually change yourself. Now, what if I don't really feel virtuous, but I just go through the motions? Will I then start to feel a virtuous person? You see where I'm going with this. I don't really want to be extroverted, but I'm going to, damn it, make myself do it. And then maybe I actually start feeling it.
Yeah, so for some of these, it does work like that. Like, so for extroversion, as I mentioned, just getting out more and talking to people more, it does work. It does make you more extroverted. People, even if they're like, I'm an introvert, I don't like talking to people. And then a scientist, they've done studies where they're like, okay, well, for a week, act like an extrovert. Just go out and
Right.
talk to people more than you normally would. And they're like, okay, fine, whatever. And they do it kind of begrudgingly. They actually feel happier having done that and more like themselves. Um, even though they were not behaving like an introvert during that time. So for some of them, it is like a fake it till you make it type thing. Conscientiousness is another one. You don't really have to be like gung ho on to-do lists and Google Calendar. You just make the Google Calendar and get like shit done, and you will be more conscientious. Like that is how it works. Things like neuroticism, it's trickier. And that's why, therapy is such a big business because, if your therapist is like, try to think about the situation more positively and you're like, I can't and I won't, you're not really going to become less neurotic if you're just like, this sucks. I don't believe you. You have to kind of like really try and really want to be less neurotic in order for that to work.
Is there any evidence that life coaches work, or gurus like the Tony Robbins of the world, the self-help books and all that stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends on the life coach and what their advice is. I actually am not too familiar with what Tony Robbins actually like says in his sessions or whatever. I I think it just depends on what their tips are. Like if the tips are kind of like motivational interviewing and like helping you get off the couch and like go do things that you have been kind of blocked from doing, then yeah, I think that can be beneficial even if they don't have a psychology degree. But I've also like written stories about life coaches that did some really shady things and some not so great stuff. So I would be hesitant to just kind of endorse all life coaches, if that makes sense.
My wife gave me a stocking stuffer little book on dismotivation posters. Like you can do anything, but you probably won't.
Right. Yes.
Really funny. Really funny. We've done a little bit on the self-help movement in Skeptic magazine. The number one predictor of who would buy one of those books are people that have already bought those books. Like at Rodale Press, the guy who was in charge of that told me this. And so if it works, why do you have to keep buying the books and the tapes and, all that stuff? And, the answer seems to be because you have to start over every day. Like, okay, and maybe you just don't feel like I'm high in conscientiousness. So every day I got to get up and like, okay, I've got to write down what I'm going to do today so I don't forget because I know I'm lazy, something like that. Maybe I guess that's what you're talking about when you talk about habits, changing your habits.
Yeah, and it is sort of a daily practice. Like I kind of, I don't know, I write about this in the book, but I was sort of like, I started out thinking like, oh, okay, I'm going to change my personality and I'm going to be totally better and different and I never have to think about it again. But I actually do think about it all the time. I'm sort of like, I'm kind of always asking myself, like, is this really true? Is this way that I'm seeing this situation accurate? Is it really going to be this bad? If this social gathering doesn't go very well, like, will that be a reason not to go? It's something that you have to kind of commit to every day and keep doing it. And so I don't know, maybe people buy the book as a reminder on their bookshelf to like keep doing it. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah. My interpretation ended up being that, every day is a new day. And if I don't work out today, then I'm going to be less fit tomorrow. Or if I eat the donut tonight, I'm going to notice it tomorrow in my waist and so on. And you just have to keep at it. Now, obviously, some people are more inclined to just do it by nature and others not. I think most of us are not. So you need the kind of reminder, just little setups. Like, I'm going to meet my friends tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. and we're going to go for our ride. And if I don't show up, then, it's going to be disappointing. And I got to get up. If I didn't have that, I might just sleep in, right?
Right.
So those are the kind of habits you have to set up, I guess, just to, I don't know, change your personality, but it just to get whatever it is you want done for your goal, whatever
Right.
that is.
And that's why I recommend, if people have the capacity to actually sign up for something, if they are really interested in doing something like this, like an improv class, or, I signed up for way too many things, but, sign up for one
You had some hilarious stories in there about these things you tried.
Yeah, but it's, they're not all going to be winners, but sign up for one thing that like is a commitment that you have to show up to or have to do. Or else you will be letting other people down because it's just too hard. Like the couch is too tempting. The siren call of introversion and Netflix is too strong. Yeah.
Right. Netflix. I know. There's so much content online. You could just sit there all day and watch. I like documentaries, and it's just endless with the, here's the next one. Oh, I got to watch that.
Right.
Speaking of Netflix and documentary, there is one called I Am Not Your Guru, and it's about Tony Robbins.
Okay.
And it really should have been called I Am Your Guru because everybody in the room is like, oh my God, I worship this guy. And what my cover story guy on the self-help movement said was that the stuff works for a little while. Like they'll hire somebody like a Tony Robbins to come in to motivate the sales force, right? Yeah, the weekend getaway. We're going to walk across hot coals and we're going to chant. And then, so for the next couple of weeks, the sales, there's a spike in the number of calls that are made and sales goes up. And then it goes back down, regression to the mean you talked about in the book, back down to whatever the mean was. So you got to bring the guy back in, right? So it's a constant sort of update.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people see that as like, Tony Robbins sucks. Like nothing he does sticks. And some people might say like, he's great. Like what he does works for 2 weeks or whatever, so it kind of depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the other things you did to change your personality?
Well, so there's like a million activities that I signed up for extroversion just to like go out and talk to people. I would say improv is probably the most promising one out of that one.
That was pretty funny. Talk about that. What's that like?
Improv is great. It's great practice for so many situations in life. If you are someone who tends toward rigidity and like kind of control in situations, it's very good for letting go of that because you will definitely be in a scene with someone. They'll be going to a place that is so weird and so awkward. You just have no idea what to say. You have to come up with something. And it's okay, no matter how it goes. It's like, it's fine. It's like repeated practice at that, like failing to like make something, scintillating or hilarious, but it being okay. I found that to be very, I don't know, fun and kind of like edifying. Great practice for being a parent as well.
It is? Why?
Because with a kid, you just have to improvise a lot. Like they'll be crying, you have no idea why, and you're like, okay, if I make a funny face, okay, if we dance to this song, okay, if we play with this toy, it's very improvisational.
Remember that Drew Carey TV show? What's My Line? I think it was where they just do improv stuff, and I just could not imagine myself doing that. It just seems impossible. Okay, here's your situation. Now go. Like
It's scary. Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing it either until I did it. But it's amazing. You can do it if pressed.
I don't feel like it. I mean, I do a lot of public speaking, but I already have in my head what I'm going to say, or I have notes or PowerPoint or whatever.
Things come to you. Things come to
They
you,
do?
or things glimmer up from the. One time, I like really had no idea what to do, and I just like started talking about Shakira. I started pretending that I was Shakira, the singer.
All right. What about counseling, therapy, that sort of thing for things like depression, anxiety, maybe?
Yeah, so therapy is quite effective. Therapy does reduce neuroticism. There's been a study on that. Any kind of therapy does help with neuroticism. What I did for the book specifically is meditation. I did a ton of meditation, all different kinds, loving kindness. The one that I did kind of the most and the longest is MBSR, which is like this scientifically tested and backed form of meditation where you do kind of meditation and then you take a class every day, not every day, every week that like, it kind of teaches you some concepts from Buddhism that could be applied to mental health. Um, that was actually really helpful. Maybe not the meditation part, but some of the like teachings from that class um, were actually just nice to have said to me. I don't know. It was very like the teacher seemed a little strange and like it was a big Zoom class. It wasn't like super intimate or like anything like that. But it was helpful. I don't know. So that's something that I would recommend to people who are struggling.
And do you still do this every day?
I don't meditate because I have a baby.
Right.
I have no time to do anything, so I don't meditate anymore, and it shows. It shows.
You mean you feel like some of your neuroticism has come back?
Yeah. Like I don't really take time for myself just with my thoughts, or just even just to like focus on my breath or just to be in the moment. I'm kind of like always go, go, go. But some moments of being with a baby are quite mindful because like you're kind of just sitting there watching them like hold a block or like, play with a toy or whatever. And like you're just there doing that. And it is kind of meditative in a way. So I don't know, maybe I do still meditate.
Well, I sometimes feel like I am doing a kind of meditation when I'm out on a long walk or a long bike ride by myself. If I'm not listening to an audiobook and I'm just kind of letting my thoughts just go. But I think it's different than the people that really do it seriously, where they, sit down and they close their eyes and they listen to their breath or they try to not think. I don't know. I'm just one of those guys that like, I sit there going, oh my God, I'm so bored.
Yeah, that was me as well. Actually walking and not listening to anything and just doing that's meditation.
Yeah. Right. So there you're calming your inner thoughts. And maybe that's part of the problem with neuroticism is that you have thought flooding, mostly negative thoughts about all the things that could happen or what you said to so-and-so and what they said to you. And you rehearse that conversation over and over. And, the cognitive behavior therapy people say this is not healthy, right? You can't change that, right? The stoicism. You can't change the past. Just go forward.
Yeah. And, this was always really hard for me, but the point in meditation is not necessarily to not think. It's to let the thoughts kind of pass without dwelling on them. So you might think like that was a dumb thing I said earlier, and you just kind of let it go by like a cloud, if that makes sense, without kind of feeling like kind of obsessing over it. Is that easy for me to do? No.
Right. Do you sometimes feel like Buddha and the Buddhists or the ancient Greek Stoics figured all this stuff out thousands of years ago, just from observation?
Yeah, it's interesting because psychology only really became a science very recently, but then like a lot of the stuff that I cite in the book is Buddhist thought or Aristotle or stuff from thousands of years ago. So, I mean, they had some weird ideas as well. Like they had, if you read in the book, they did have strange ideas, but they also were right sometimes, a broken clock.
Well, I think, but I think, just through observation, what are people like and what helps them or doesn't help them? They didn't have the scientific method to run a controlled trial experiment on it, gold standard or anything like that, but you could kind of see what works, right? So, I mean, like I had Greg Lukianoff on the show and Jonathan Haidt talking about the coddling of the American mind. What has gone wrong with teenagers these days and young adults? They're far more anxious and depressed and have higher rates of suicidal ideation and cutting. What is going on here, right? Social media, maybe too much screen time, not enough outdoor time, not enough time with friends, a bunch of different things. But part of it, because Greg Lukianoff suffered from extreme depression. So he went through cognitive behavior therapy and really changed that by doing the stuff you talk about, right? I'm just going to change my habits. I'm going to do something different. One of which was stop catastrophizing everything, right? So stuff happens to everybody. And, if you're walking around blowing it up, constantly thinking about it and like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. And it's going to get even worse tomorrow. That has negative consequences on your mood.
Yeah. I mean, and cognitive behavioral therapy is it is kind of the gold standard for changing neuroticism. I struggled with that particular kind of therapy. I am still in therapy, and my therapist uses that modality in part. But one thing that is challenging about that is that you have to be very good at changing your thoughts, which most people struggle with. Like, it's very hard to just not think something when you are
Right.
kind of thinking it. And so, it's like the don't think of an elephant type
Right.
problem. So CBT is great when it works, but there's other kind of therapies out there, for people that find it hard.
So the issues you're addressing in your therapy are related to this neuroticism stuff you talk about in the book and your response to things in the environment?
Yeah, sort of just like things that happen and how I'm freaking out over them.
I mean, so besides talking about it, like, okay, let's talk about what happened to you this week. And okay, here's the things that set me off. Then what?
Oh, that's interesting. So sometimes my therapist and I do, and I write about this in the book as well, like a form of therapy or even like a thought process called acceptance and commitment,
Yeah.
or ACT,
Act.
which
Right.
is basically like um, accepting that things will be hard and doing them anyway. That's the best way
Right.
I can kind of summarize it. So this comes in handy when it comes to personality change or really any difficult project in your life. Because it comes up when the thought process, like, this is hard, so I don't want to do it, like, doesn't really work. So like parenting is a great example. Like, every single part of it has been the hardest thing I've ever done up until that point, until the next day comes and something harder happens. Like, the pregnancy was hard, giving birth was hard, the newborn phase was hard. Now he's 10 months old, and that's hard in a different way. And but at the same time, it's like, I'm not going to like give up on being a good mom because it's hard. And so you have to find other ways of thinking about it, that don't involve like giving up, essentially. And so I don't know. So sometimes we do like more of like what I would consider like ACT type therapy.
Right. Here's in your appendix, you list things for achieving emotional stability. Write about a positive thing that happened to you that day and how it made you feel. List the things you're grateful for. Write about your good qualities. Write 3 positive thoughts for each negative thought. Get a 3-to-1. Write down evidence against negative thoughts. Like, what would that be? These are the bad things that happen when I have negative thoughts. And by writing them down, I'm reminding myself, don't do that.
No. So that would be like, let's say I'm having the negative thought, like, nobody likes me. I would write, well, I had a friend come over yesterday to visit me.
Oh, I see.
My husband gave me a kiss this morning, whatever. Like, yeah.
I see. When you wake up, say, I choose to be happy today. Some of this reminds me of Stuart Smalley. Remember the
Yeah.
SNL? Doggone it, people like me.
And those are from the study, the like big study on personality change that I
Yeah.
like base a lot of the book on. But I have to say that toward the end, I was not doing like those exact ones. Like, he gives you a whole menu of activities to do, and I picked like some of the more kind of fun ones. But I wasn't. I was mostly meditating and exercising.
Yes, exercise. That is a huge thing, isn't it? The research on that is pretty clear that getting out once a day for half an hour or something and moving your muscles, getting the blood flowing makes a difference.
Yeah, and it's really it's something that just really works for me. It's a total mood booster.
What is it? The endorphins or what's happening in your body?
Oh gosh, this is something I'm not as well versed on, but I think it actually like changes your brain, and it kind of like creates new neural pathways. I'm not totally sure, but it's more than just the endorphins. It's something about, our bodies were meant to move. Like, we weren't
Yes,
really meant to
move.
sit in chairs for like 14
Right.
hours a day.
Right.
So
Yeah, I'm kind of a nut this way. I work out every day. And if I don't, I start getting anxious and depressed and irritable. Like, I got to get out there. And that's one reason I try to do it in the morning. So the rest of the day feels better rather than, oh no, the day is going by and I'm not going to get my workout in. Damn it.
yeah, a lot of people have that same thinking that like, yeah, they have to start the day with the run or whatever else just to get some of that like physical energy out.
Right. Do you know Jocko Willink, the retired Navy SEAL guy that makes inspirational videos, and he has a podcast and so on. He has one called Good. And so he wants you to reconfigure your emotional states by just whenever something bad happens, say good. So so you didn't pass that test. Good, opportunity to get better. Now he's a big MMA guy, right? So you got beat in the good. Time to get up off the mat and get better, right? And restructure and refocus, and it's really quite motivating. I'm not sure it's kind of a big bro thing, right? But I used to show it to my students. They kind of rolled their eyes, like, "Oh, come on, I'm not going to be a Navy SEAL," right?
I mean, if you're able to do that, that's like really remarkable. I'm not able. I'm not there yet. But yeah, I mean. But one thing my meditation teacher would always say is, things happen that you don't like, which sounds like obviously like things happen that you don't like, but I don't know, for some reason it was like very helpful for me to hear that from someone else, because it kind of made me realize that you can't always control things and make it so that nothing bad ever happened. Like sometimes bad things will just happen and you just have to deal with them. And that was like kind of a weird breakthrough for me for whatever reason.
Yeah. The example I gave, since these are undergraduate students, is like, okay, you didn't get into the college you wanted to get into. Good. You got into this college. This is the better college, right? This was at Chapman University. Didn't get the class you wanted. Good. You got my class. And that's lucky for you. Or you got dumped by your boyfriend or girlfriend. Good. Find somebody better, right? And just to try to turn those things into opportunities. Although after watching this video a gazillion times, and I'm walking around my day going, "Oh yeah, I have to channel my inner Jocko Willink and say good," and it is pretty hard to do. Like, God damn it, I am not happy this happened, but I'm supposed to say good, but I don't feel good.
Yeah, that's actually there is this psychologist, Dan McAdams, who studies like redemptive narratives, and that actually reminds me of some of his work, because his whole idea is that, like, obviously bad things happen to us all. Things happen that you don't like, but the way you kind of think about them in your life is a big predictor of mental health. So the people who tend to be mentally healthier and kind of better off have this redemptive arc. So yeah, I didn't get into the college of my choice, but I got into this one instead, and now I'm doing really great. Kind of I've been redeemed. Or, my fiance left me at the altar, but at the bar afterwards I met the new love of my life. So yeah, so it is kind of something that tends to be more common among people who are mentally healthier. But the reverse is the contamination narrative, which is where something bad happens and it sets you on a downward spiral. So if you start to think like, now I'll never find love, or I'll never achieve anything, that's like where negativity really starts to creep in. And but I don't necessarily know how to, like, I don't know, maybe that is the way to get yourself on a redemptive narrative, is just to say good.
Well, but again, I think you have to remind yourself every day, because it's just hard to do it. That is the point of the self-help thing, is that every day is a new day. I'm going to get up and write down those goals, or I'm going to be more conscientious or more extroverted. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So you had I had one more thing I was going to read here from the, agreeableness. To increase your agreeableness, if let's say you're a slightly disagreeable person, volunteer, give someone a compliment, send a friend an encouraging text, apologize even when the other person doesn't. I really don't like doing that. Write down a nice thing someone did for you. Reflect on good qualities of people you love. Make a list of times people kept their promises to you. Choose to forgive someone. Again, really, even if they don't say they're sorry?
Yeah, I mean, this is what agreeable people do. They turn the other cheek and they apologize, and they're low conflict people, and they're low in conflict. Yeah, and I'm not like that either. So it doesn't. Yeah, I don't like forgiving people when they're not sorry. And
Yeah. I had Kevin Kelly on the show. He wrote a book of a book of wisdom, little quotes he's had throughout his life. He's the founder of Wired magazine and a kind of a futurist. Anyway, he's quite the guy. One of his was forgiveness, and he says, it's not for the other person, it's for you. It's so that you quit obsessing about it. The other person probably doesn't even care if you forgive them or not, right? But you have in your head that person did this thing to me. So by forgiving them, you're letting yourself go.
Yeah. A lot of people think of forgiveness that way, that it's for yourself, that it's something that you do to move on from the situation, move on from whatever hurt that was caused, and just to kind of let go and stop thinking about it. And that doesn't necessarily even mean that you have to reconcile, or reach back out to the person who wronged you. It just means that you personally in your heart forgive them. That takes a pretty big and agreeable person to do.
Well, you're an N of one. So looking back on your life, your parents, great grandparent, you talk about all that in the book. To what extent is that kind of set you on a path generationally? And what would you attribute it to? My mom did this, or my dad did that, or they were this way genetically, and I got some of that.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was a combination of genetics and upbringing. So my parents are both very anxious people, and anxiety was just like a big part of my childhood. So they would just worry all the time. They would worry to us. They would worry around the dinner table. My dad always thought he was going to get laid off. That was his big fear, that he was going to get laid off from his job. And so he would worry about that at dinner. And that was the topic of the dinner, family dinner for years.
Wow.
I'm going to get laid off. What are we going to do? When I was in middle school.
Wow.
And so,
that's a bit of a burden to put on a child.
I mean, that's not even the half of it, but yeah, yes, it is. So I think it was just sort of this sense that first of all, just a predisposition toward anxiety, and then plus being raised in this sort of anxious cauldron with two people who themselves are very anxious.
Yeah. Some of that is definitely genetic, and different populations have more or less of some of that for sure. But again, the science you review in the book shows, well, you can do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, then that's why I wanted to tackle that one, is because I don't want to do that to my son. I don't want him to look back and be like, my mom was always saying, this bad thing will happen or that bad thing will happen. I want him to be whatever, cautiously optimistic. And so, yeah, I mean, part of this was motivation for kind of the next generation.
All right. What are you working on next? What's your next project?
Oh my God. My next project is
writing project.
starting solids.
Oh, besides your son,
baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. What am I? I'm writing right now. I'm writing about nostalgia. But I'm not working on another book yet.
Nostalgia. Yes. That's a great subject. Because I'm just turned 70, I've been feeling more nostalgic about my past. And I see that my old neighborhood down in Altadena just got burned to the crisp in the fires. And it's I really feel weird about it. That's part of my past that just burnt down. I don't have a home there anymore, but yeah, I kind of see that happening. I think nostalgia is probably a good thing.
Yeah. Nostalgia, yeah, it can be good. It can actually help us heal and make sense of our past. From my limited research that I've done so far, it's kind of something that helps us, kind of process everything that's happened to us, good and bad.
Well, once your son goes off to preschool and then school, it does get easier. They get much more independent, and it's a lot more fun. I find I have an 8-year-old, I have a 33-year-old and an 8-year-old. How's that for a gap?
Yeah.
And the free time. Yeah, and women definitely have more of the burden. I trust you carry more of the burden than your partner.
I do, and part of that is just, I think, because I'm more invested. I'm no, that's not how we make his oatmeal. I could probably let go a little bit and have more time to myself.
You'll get that in time. All right, Olga, thanks a lot. Here it is again, Me But Better. Get the book. It's a great read, really fun. Thanks for writing that. Thanks for coming on the show and talking to me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah.